Hi folks, it's Brian, the Repentant Sinner here, and it's August 2018. We just had the release of the Pennsylvania grand jury report on clergy sex abuse within several dioceses in Pennsylvania. Now, I don't normally script my YouTube videos. I usually have kind of a general framework that in my head, and then I kind of go off the cuff. Today's going to seem even more disjointed than that, just because went through the 1,300 and some pages of the document. It's not all the document, a lot of it's exhibits, but it's several hundred pages of really graphic and horrible stories. And so from a Catholic perspective, I think it's worth talking about. I don't think I've ever seen anything as dramatic within the Catholic world as this. The effect on the laity has been profound, and it's everybody on social media as well as regular media outlets, even what you would be surprised, some media outfits that probably wouldn't generally talk like this about misconduct like this have really come down hard, and I don't think that things are going to be the same after this. So, a couple of takeaways here from the Catholic perspective. One, there is simply nothing defensible about any of the findings in the report. As a Catholic, as an apologist, as an evangelist, whether you're a street evangelist or whether you're talking to somebody one-on-one, if this subject comes up, there is nothing to say other than I am profoundly sorry. I'm sorry on behalf of my church. I'm sorry on behalf of my priests. I'm sorry on behalf of everybody that was hurt by this. There is no excuse. There is nothing that can be said other than I'm sorry. There are things that I'm seeing in the media and that in some Catholic circles that attempt to mitigate a bit of what happened, and it's not that they're being false. They're true. Such as the fact that the vast majority of what was discussed happened a long time ago. Usually, for most of the report, it happened all usually before 2002, with some rare exceptions. The other thing that people say is, well, this happens in other institutions, it happens in other venues, public schools, whatnot. That's true as well. And some people are saying, well, there are people with anti-Catholic biases who are sort of jumping onto this report, to kind of use it to defame the Catholic Church, and there might be some of that as well. The truth is, as a Catholic, we should engage in none of that. Any attempt to mitigate the material that's in that report does an incredible dishonor and a disservice to the suffering of the victims, and it's really there's nothing excusable about it. We have to basically, as a church, simply accept the fact that there were some really horrible crimes that took place, and then look at what was the reaction, which in so many ways was ignorant and stupid and misguided and negligent and reckless, and there just probably aren't enough adjectives for what most people are deeming the cover-up. Now, I will say that in looking at the documents, you do get the sense of that it wasn't one thing in terms of the cover-up. That there was parts of the cover-up that were done clearly for optical reasons, clearly to avoid litigation, absolutely, that's just horrible. And then there are other places where you simply get a sense of people who are in charge that just were so ignorant of the scope of the problem and were willing to accept these men's statements at face value that they had changed or were healed or whatnot. And so it really isn't one thing. It's not one-dimensional. As Catholic laity, I think we have an absolute right to demand to know who knew what and when they knew it. You know, in terms of should we put this to bed and kind of move on, that's probably was the gut reaction maybe in generations past. I think today that's all gone. I think we need full disclosure. I think every diocese needs to just come out with the facts, as awful as they may be. Everybody who is a Catholic has a right to know these things. The troubling thing for me is that this Pennsylvania report really is just a sample of what is a much wider, larger problem within the Catholic Church. And while while it's true that the pedophilia side of things is not as I don't even know how to say it right, but they have made a lot of changes since 2002. Their systems are a lot better. Their policies are a lot better. You know that it still goes on. To what extent, I'm not sure. But there's also a larger, wider problem with certain members of the clergy that are basically have betrayed their vows and are engaged in acts, whether they're consensual or criminal, that violate every part of who they are as priests. So, and we have a right to know about this, and frankly then we should discuss it as a community. I mean, my personal feeling on the subject is there really does need to be a zero tolerance attitude on this. If someone is found to have violated their vows, whether it was of a consensual nature or whether it was of a criminal nature, at a minimum, that should be it for them, and as being a member of the clergy. That betrayal of trust, I think, is too great, and I think the danger is too profound for us to accept anything less. And so I know that's not a very forgiving attitude, and maybe it's just because it's very fresh in my mind. I think I got about maybe an hour of sleep last night. The description of the crimes was so profound. It affected me greatly, and I am going to have to do a lot of praying. I'm going to have to go to confession. I'm going to have to talk to my priest. I'm going to have to do a lot to get my head straight after having read that report. And so I think as a community at large, we need to take a hard look at ourselves. Now, if there's any hope in this at all, it is that historically the Church has gone through crises of a similar nature, in that there were times historically in the past when priests abused their authority, certainly with respect to lust and fornication, and the Church was able to respond as a whole and fix those problems. And so we now have a real problem in our midst, and I think that we have every right to demand action on the part of the Church leadership. So I'm waiting to see what happens. I think there's absolutely nothing. Nothing is going to be the same after this. This report was, while it depicts some acts, it depicts crimes that happened a long time ago, I don't think we've ever gotten to know the scope of it. And this was just Pennsylvania. Heaven only knows what happened in Los Angeles or any of the other larger dioceses. So you know, this is going to be a time for some soul searching among Catholics. It is also, besides the heinous crimes, besides the horrible cover-up, besides everything else, it affects our faith because we are already behind the power curve in terms of trying to evangelize to others. We've become a secular society. We're a post-Christian nation. We already are going to have so many hard times confronting people about where the benefits of faith come in, and then this absolute horrible event which has been taking place for decades. Now it comes to the forefront, and we have to deal with it. I think that the spearhead of this will be the laity, and I didn't invent this. Really smart people are saying this, and I agree with them. That in fact it's going to be the laity that are going to demand change. There is absolutely no way anybody is going to allow what happened in the past to take place in the future. People are going to revolt. You're already seeing it on social media. There have been incredible outcries from all different circles for several of the bishops to resign. I can say that I've read maybe about a half dozen of the releases that have come out from some of the bishops, and frankly I find them to be somewhat tone deaf. It can't be we pray for the victims, we feel bad, etc., etc., etc. If you read that report, you can't leave that report with a sense of, well, this is really too bad and we should pray about it. We should be praying about it, but the fact is we need resignations, we need accountability, we need to know what happened and where it happened, and the laity have a right to demand this from the clergy. And then finally, the saddest part about the whole thing is we have some amazing priests, men who give up every promise of the secular world to devote themselves to God, and more importantly, to devote themselves to us, to the care and saving of our souls. And these men have been betrayed because their fellow priests, whether it was last year or 20 years ago or 50 years ago, their actions reflect on the priests of today. Much the same way we honor our saints. Our saints and our martyrs are also a reflection of our priests today, and our priests today have a right to be proud of the sacrifices of priests in the past. And but in the same token, the flip side of it is you draw the same shame from the actions of priests that just reflect horribly upon the priesthood. And let's understand ourselves. For my friends out there who are atheists, or my friends out there who might be anti-Catholic, I know you're going to say, well, this has something to do with the church or its policies, or perhaps priestly celibacy or something like this. Nothing can be further from the truth. If you read that report, you clearly understand the fact, and it's a very plain, it becomes a real obvious fact. There were some sick men that I don't know whether they were drawn to the priesthood because they thought that it was a place where they could do their abuse, but it was very clear that these were not holy men. These were not men that took their vows seriously at all. There is nothing in the Bible that justifies this. There's nothing in the Catechism of the Catholic Church that justifies this. If they followed the precepts of the Catholic Church that has been around for almost 2,000 years, none of this would have happened. These men are not a reflection of the Catholic Church, but we have to acknowledge the fact that publicly our priests are the public image of our church. They are who we associate our church with, and most of the time that's good. Right now, it's kind of bad, and it's really hurting everybody, and it's hurting priests especially. So for my Catholic friends out there, we need to be praying. we need to be demanding answers. Certainly this is not something where prayer alone is enough. We need to be demanding answers. We need to be screaming at the top of our lungs for change, for accountability, but at the same time we need to be praying more. You know, and when we're praying, we need to be praying for our good priests, because they're right now, I am sure, suffering as much as all of us are, and probably you know, probably more, because you know it's so tied to who their identity is. We need to pray for these victims. These victims, you know, it doesn't even, it's not even describable. In one sense, I will say, if you're not a person of strong constitution, my recommendation is not to read the report. The report is so graphic, and it describes crimes that are so heinous that it will scar you. In my career, I've been to murder scenes, I've been to homicides, I've been to suicides, I've seen dead bodies, I've seen stabbings. Like I said, I think maybe I slept 1 or 2 hours last night. The descriptions of the crimes that took place, it caused me an immense amount of mental anguish, and I've been praying real hard, and it's still a cloud over me, and that's just reading a report. Now, by the way, I read the report, just in case you're wondering why would I do that, or why did I go through the whole thing. I read the report so that I could essentially spare members of our apologetics discussion group from having to read the report. I'm an attorney by trade, so the report itself flows pretty easily for me in terms of legal documents, and so I was able to read it, distill it, and then give a report to our apologetics discussion group. I wasn't doing it because I'm a glutton for punishment. I think every Catholic should read at least the very first part, probably the first 15 pages or so. Give a pretty good synopsis of what you're about to encounter, and it's plenty. If you have the wherewithal to read the whole thing, and especially if you're going to be confronted by people who are going to challenge our faith because of that report, it does behoove you to spend some time going into it, because you will see a lot of the timeline that takes place, and it gives you a much clearer picture of how this was able to happen, because there is a somewhat cartoonish or two-dimensional narrative of sort of criminal priests preying on children, and then bishops who essentially kind of help facilitate this. It almost gives you the impression that the bishops were sitting there and almost wanted the abuse to take place. I don't think that that's anybody's really arguing that that's what the bishops wanted. I think what you see is an extremely reckless perspective among the bishops in dealing with this crime, and so it's not really a case that they were trying to so much facilitate it, although that's what they ended up doing through their actions. And so as laity, we have the right to demand answers because of that. And the biggest thing really is this: if you have proven yourself in the private sector to be supremely incompetent at your job, you get fired. I mean, that's just the way it works. I've always worked in the private sector, and it's a performance-based world. And if you utterly fail, you're gone. And some of these bishops, they don't have the right to be there just because they've inertia and they've been there long enough. They utterly failed at their jobs. Whether they consciously failed or not, or whether they simply did it through ignorance or negligence, is really beside the point. The effects are clear, and they need to lose their jobs, plain and simple, and that needs to come from the top. Finally, I'm going to leave it with this. While I think that it is very, very, very likely that abuse continues to go on, it doesn't go on to the extent that it did before 2002, but because of the procedures that have been put in place, we can't minimize that. There's abuse that continues to go on, and we have to be ultra vigilant about it. The Pennsylvania report completely bypassed any allegations of abuse that took place between priests and adults. And when I say adults, I mean people who were 18 or over. And that's a very vulnerable age. You know, young men who are 18 to 22, that's when they're going into seminary, that's when they're in college, that's where they have the ability to encounter people who have greater power than them and who may force them into situations much like the way we saw in Hollywood with the entire Me Too movement. The Pennsylvania report completely bypasses that, and that is a growing scandal, as we started to see with the Cardinal McCarrick scandal, and that was not discussed in this Pennsylvania report, which means we have a whole other, unfortunately, chapter that we have not opened, we have not examined, and I think that one, I'm not sure that the controls that were put in place to protect children back in the early 2000s, I don't think that those really have any bearing on protecting younger men who are being preyed upon. And I think that this is something that we as Catholics need to be very vigilant about, and we need to demand answers. There's already a shortage of priests. At this point right now, I'm not sure how you can really feel safe sending a young man to seminary without really questioning whether he's going to be safe there. And it pains me to say that, but there are some real problems that need to be confronted, and the work is not over. I'm you know, is it going to be a painful chapter for Catholics? Are we going to spend a number of years really suffering hopefully as the truth comes out? Probably, but I think this is necessary. I think this is something that the Church will be better for when it's at the end. While the process is going to be painful, we need to get through this. So my hope is every diocese opens its archives, its vault, whatever that secret file is called, and that it doesn't have to be a Pennsylvania-style grand jury. I mean, my hope would be that this comes right from the top, that the Vatican basically says, listen, we don't need subpoenas, we're going to basically, here you go, we're going to release it, and let the chips fall where they may, because the old way of doing things, where we kind of gather the wagons around and you know, shield information, wait for statute of limitations to run out because we're trying to protect ourselves from liability and whatnot, those days are gone. And as Catholics, we have a right to demand that accountability, because at the end of the day, really, the victims have a right to this, and we can't continue to be ignorant about what happened. So you know, I'm sorry if the video is a bit more disjointed than it might otherwise be. Like I said, this report crushed me. I think Father John Hollowell called it soul crushing. That's an absolute correct description of it, and it really beat me up real bad. And I pray for our priests. I pray for our church. I pray for the victims. Boy, some of these people suffered unspeakable horrors, and I'm so very sorry. And as a Catholic, I think if we're going to have a party stance, the party stance needs to be, it's horrible and I'm sorry, and that's as far as it goes. We should not justify anything. We should not try to defend anything. We should try to mitigate it. We shouldn't try to minimize it. We should say it was horrible. It's indefensible. There's nothing I can say that can make what happened better, other than to say, I'm, as a Catholic, as an individual Catholic, I'm demanding full accountability. I'm demanding full disclosure, and I want some people to lose their jobs. And I know that it might be too late for some of these guys to be put in prison, but at a minimum, there are some people that are still around that have their jobs, that it helped with, whether you want to call it a cover-up or simply just an incredible reckless behavior with respect to these dangerous criminals, these people need to lose their jobs. Plain and simple. They need to resign. They need to spend the remainder of their career praying for forgiveness and thinking upon the pain of the victims. They shouldn't be at galas or fundraisers or on TV. It's just that time is done. And if there's any of these priests that are still around, as a lawyer, I understand that even if we change the laws related to statute of limitations, these guys are probably going to escape prosecution, and it's incredibly unfortunate. If there's any of these guys that still fall within that category, they need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And you know, it's just one of these things where we can't have anything less than a zero tolerance policy going forward. So you know, this was cathartic for me. It was helpful to get it off of my chest. I thank you for watching this with me, and you know, I'm praying for our church, praying for our priests, praying for the victims, and I hope you do the same.